Thank you for the introduction, and thank you for having me to speak today about the Baton Rouge Area Chamber and the local economy. I want to introduce two from our team. Kelly Bien is our Senior Vice President of Marketing. Achilles Williams is our Chief Financial Officer. We're happy to have two of our great team here with us today who do all the work, and I just get to get up here and talk about how great it is. My remarks today, of course, come at an auspicious time for the Baton Rouge area. As you know, on January 10th, Georgia Pacific announced unfortunately, that they are shutting down significant components of their Port Hudson facility, a major manufacturing facility here in Baton Rouge, and laying off about 650 people, a process that's going to take place between now and about April, so fairly short. Just after that, on January 14th, BASF announced they were closing a glycol unit affecting 54 folks also in the Zachary area, a process that's going to take place between now and roughly end of this calendar year. And then the next day, Thompson Pipe Group, also in Zachary, announced a shutdown of a factory there where they might make their pipes that they sell to the energy industry, affecting 120 workers, and that shutdown process where they're consolidating activities into Texas, that's going to conclude by this summer. So that's a rough 5 days to start with for this year. Humbling as a beginning for a year when so many other things have really been when going well. That's 824 permanent jobs. And of course, with manufacturing, there's a significant ripple effect in that employment sector. So it's important to know that there's a significant spillover effect in addition to just those 824 that we want to be cognizant of and paying attention to as a community. It's worth perhaps also a little bit closer discussion about what specifically is happening with those cases and what's going to happen to our community as those changes occur. So with BASF, it's a German company. Their largest North American manufacturing facility also happens to be in the Baton Rouge area. It's in Geismar in Ascension Parish. And already about half of the Zachary employees have been offered positions with the company, and they're working hard to transition as many of their employees over the course of the year as they make their changes. For Thompson Pipe, some of the folks have said that they're working hard to make sure that they're transitioning and supporting as many of the employees being given positions with Thompson in Texas. You never want to lose folks from the community or from the state, but making sure that the citizens and those employees have a path forward for their families, so it's good to know that options are available. Estimates are roughly that maybe 30 or 35 folks may be remaining after they have offered as many positions as they have offered, and so when that takes place by the end of this, roughly by this summer, we expect that maybe the leftover impact is still about 30 or 35 folks or so that are going to be looking for opportunities. Of course, Georgia Pacific's is one that's the biggest impact, and it's really kind of fascinating to think about that it's a story of technological change. They cited, of course, that the office paper market that line specifically sold into had been in decline 3 to 5% annually for a number of years. They had an uncompetitive process from a cost standpoint, which they highlighted, but they were also in a declining business. And so in many ways, unfortunately, it was only a matter of time for that factory. The good news, if there's a silver lining in such a tough story, is what happened next. Very shortly after the announcement, in fact, by that afternoon of the announcement, we all partnered together, government and nonprofit organizations that work on business issues, and reached out shortly after with an email to the Baton Rouge area business community and said, if you have an interest in the people that are being affected by this layoff and you might look to be interested in hiring, we want to host a job fair. Please sign up to be notified for the opportunity to sign up. And over 100 employers signed up to that email outreach within less than a week, which is an incredible sign of just how much else is happening in the Baton Rouge area economy. And it's important to note that trained, experienced manufacturing talent is still very much in high demand across the Baton Rouge area because of so many other manufacturing expansions and the amount of construction activity that's happening. The other interesting point, I think, about the GP story is their employment distribution as a company. We may not know this, we may not pay attention to it, but 56% of the employees at Georgia Pacific actually work either in the Zachary or East Baton Rouge area. So almost half of the employees working at GP actually come in from the other 8 or more outlying parishes surrounding East Baton Rouge. And so while we may think of this as directly hitting Zachary and East Baton Rouge, and of course it does, it may also be a little bit narrow in how we just think about the effect of this and truly understanding that this is something that is a regional impact and the regional response needs to be corresponding. Of the 100 employers who signed up for the job fair, we actually saw that many of them were from throughout the region, not just from Zachary or East Baton Rouge Parish. And so that's a good sign that this is something that can help those folks, perhaps even work even closer to their homes in many cases. We also saw that, I think if there's a lesson here, that regionalism, which we have expounded as a philosophy at BRAC, as a 9-parish organization, not only can help us be stronger as an economic development community, but it can also help cushion some of the setbacks when what we've seen in January occurs. Of course, shortly after that, we saw ExxonMobil's applications for incentives turned down at the East Baton Rouge School Board. And moreover, I think the tone and anti-business rhetoric that occurred at a marathon 7-hour school board meeting really was alarming in many ways, such that our parish's largest taxpayer made the $6 million decision to pull its exemption applications from consideration, where they still had 2 more steps to go, and they released a very sharply worded statement about the current climate in Baton Rouge and about doing business here. And it was for that reason that the Baton Rouge Area Chamber Board of Directors and its officers put in the paper this past weekend and Sunday a full-page ad, really as an open letter to Baton Rouge, calling for kind of a reset as a community, that we need a new path forward for attracting manufacturing investment, especially in the climate that we've seen with some of the layoffs that occurred. What we want to make sure that we focus on is a community focused on reliability, predictability, clear rules, dispassionate processes for reviewing those rules in order to determine eligibility for incentives. And I think that's really what we've been saying all along, is find a way to have that accountability that we all need from incentives, but also make sure that we set clear guidelines and that we stick to them. We all say this all the time, but we know that incentives themselves, they don't secure jobs. And almost all site consultants that we work with would tell you and confirm that incentives are typically one of the last criteria that they consider when a company is making an investment decision. But of course, they still are a consideration in the process. At BRAC, we believe in a competitive tax policy. As I've said, we believe in setting clear rules and as close as possible to making them statutory in nature. We also want to make sure that we define what the public wants in return for those incentives, and that we hold our businesses and our manufacturers accountable for the promises that they made and make sure that they are kept. And while there has been some confusion about how the program works today, it's important that we note for the public very clearly that ITEP, as it sits today with the governor's most recent executive order, provides for exactly that structure. There's a cooperative endeavor agreement and a contract that a company has to sign to promise to hold themselves accountable to the promises made. It also lays out a very clear process for how a company should seek application. Amidst all the confusion, also, there's been good news from the Metro Council and the East Baton Rouge School Board. And actually, in the case of the school board, it occurred on the same night as the East Baton Rouge School Board rejected Exxon's application. They've all adopted a form of guidelines about the decision-making criteria that they want to use with regard to the program going forward. And while these programs aren't necessarily statutory in nature, they're guidelines, and there are no guarantees. They express, for the first time, the policy wishes of these bodies about ITEP. And they also, we think, form the foundation of a predictable set of rules going forward. And the bodies both have said that they intend to approve applications in the future that follow those guidelines. And so that sets forth a path. What we want to now make sure, based with that good start, it's critical that we see these work in action and that the rules that have been set forward are followed. But the layoffs and ITEP, it's important that we also note that this is not the entire universe of what's happening in Baton Rouge, although it may feel like that in the first 30 days of the year. It's also important to note that economic development is much, much more than those things, and I've highlighted those to you before in past speeches. In fact, I did so a year ago before you in 2018. I dare say right now that if all we talked about today were layoffs or ITEP or negative news, that we would be missing the forest for the trees for what has been happening in the Baton Rouge area right now. And that forest right now is a very resilient economy with a significant foundation for growth, and something that BRAC has been focused on. What we want to make sure is that we take a moment, take a breath, and focus on those things, those indicators, and the progress. And I'd say it's been a hell of a year for progress. And some of the outcomes that we want to highlight for you include these. Over the last year, our region saw $1.7 billion in announced new capital investment in our 9-parish area. Our team worked with over 15 projects on their decisions in the Baton Rouge area, and those attributed to securing, either retaining or creating, over 1,000 direct permanent jobs throughout the 9-parish region. And that will attribute to $55 million in new annual payroll in our communities. Those include not just East Baton Rouge Parish, but again, reinforcing our regionalism. Those also included projects in Ascension Parish, Iberville Parish, West Baton Rouge, and even East Feliciana that saw either expansions or new project announcements happening in their communities. Another great indicator, through November, the Baton Rouge area has grown at 1.4% in non-farm jobs, attributing to 5,700 new jobs that have been created year over year in our regional economy. That's continued growth. What's also interesting that we noted is that it represents an all-time high in total non-farm employment in the Baton Rouge area, a point that could be lost amidst the noise and news of the last month. Our area unemployment rate is at 4%, a very low unemployment rate for our community, lower still than the state's unemployment rate, which stays right now at 4.5%. We also have seen, and we loved this statistic, we talked about it last month, over the last decade, median household incomes in our community grew at 29%, which is a faster rate of increase than the state of Louisiana. When you average our peer communities that Baton Rouge competes with in the South, it exceeds their rate of increase for median household income. Communities like Birmingham or Mobile or Louisville, Kentucky with their famous Bourbon Trail, it also exceeds that of the United States as a whole. Regional household incomes in the Baton Rouge area actually reached their highest point as of the last reported number back in 2016 at $57,000. We also saw progress on some of our key policy goals last year. We've highlighted for a number of years, in fact, it's ranked six years in a row as the #1 concern of business, the issue of traffic and transportation in the Baton Rouge area. Well, we sit here a year later after we talked about this last year, that 2018 was really the first year in over a decade that we saw incredible progress on transportation. In fact, we've seen now over $1.5 billion in project funding, either announced, secured, or actually under construction in the 9-parish area. That includes the I-10 widening in Ascension Parish, the Terrace Street exit addition to I-110, which addresses the Washington Street bottleneck and that infamous one-lane challenge that's nationally known for I-10. It also includes what happened just over a year ago when the governor announced the Garvey bond funding for $360 million to expand I-10 between the split and the bridge. A project, while it still is going through the environmental review process, is a shot in the arm for probably the most important transportation project that we've been highlighting for a very long time. And of course it includes the Move BR initiative of the mayor and the Metro Council, which put it on the ballot, that passed resoundingly last fall. That project, which of course included Future PAC support, our political action committee, which contributed substantial dollars to support the marketing initiatives to its passage, but we also saw executive leadership in the Baton Rouge area standing up and saying, we have to make sure this passes for the good of our area and for the future of our area, for this #1 issue that we've been talking about for so long. So we were thrilled to see it pass and really upgrading the arterial infrastructure throughout the parish, but also the quality of life and the walkability and the bike paths of our community as well. Last year during the legislative session, we worked on legislation to create a 5-parish area South Bridge District, something that's actually modeled on legislation that we see in Texas, where in Texas you don't necessarily wait for their Department of Transportation to act. You see toll authorities in places like Houston that stand up and create projects to build mega projects as municipalities or as regional toll authorities. And that's something that we think is really a directional trend change, for perhaps for Louisiana, but for sure for the Baton Rouge area, where we don't want to wait anymore to see major projects move forward. Another great quality of life initiative of the last year concerns an issue that was of a lot of concern to folks at the end of 2017, the issue of crime. Last March, we called a meeting of the criminal justice leadership in partnership with the Baton Rouge Area Foundation to ask them, what plan do you propose would address the concerns of Baton Rouge related to crime? And BRAC partnered with BRAF shortly after that to create a BRAF crime fund that they've been hosting for us. And BRAC has been pushing out across the business community to raise dollars. You saw Mike Wampold and Jim Bernhardt announce a $200,000 gift to restart what was the BRAVE program called now Truce, which is really an objective, data-driven crime-fighting strategy. But we also pushed to raise dollars for the needed crime technologies that were outlined by our criminal justice leadership. And I'm excited to announce today the results of that push just last year raised $468,000 just that went into the BRAF Crime Fund for crime-fighting equipment. That was outlined as the priority of the crime leadership, like the DA, the sheriff, and the police chief. The city parish also contributed dollars to Truce, and across all sources, from the things that were highlighted at that March meeting, we've now seen over $800,000 committed toward the needs of the criminal justice leadership. On issues like education last year, East Baton Rouge voters resoundingly said that they are supportive of local education leadership, and public education had a big shot in the arm with an education tax renewal last year that's going to raise another $937 million for our community. That includes $477 million for school construction and facility upgrades for our community. What was amazing is the rate of passage, the lowest rate of approval was 64%, the highest was 70%, showing that our community absolutely wants to see reinvestment in public education. BRAC, of course, endorsed the plan, was excited to see it includes 2 to 3 new schools that are going to be added, created, and constructed through this plan that's going to continue to follow population shift and population growth in our community, as well as needed renovations to outdated facilities across the entirety of the school district. I really do think, in fact, that public education choices is a topic that's trending. In fact, public schools like Mayfair Lab, Woodlawn High, Idea Schools, Lehigh, the new and popular BASF schools at Women's Hospital, which had an incredible waiting list for folks trying to get into it in its first year when it opened in August. Schools like Flame or Westdale Elementary, where my kids go, and my wife is here today, at the Dufrock School, the Ducks, the great Ducks of Dufrock. These are schools that are attracting folks back into public education, and it's exciting to see that it's not only something that we can have confidence in, but pride that the future trajectory is heading in a new and exciting direction. I've heard it firsthand, in fact, this past fall, firsthand stories of families choosing to move from Livingston Parish and Ascension Parish into East Baton Rouge Parish to attend public schools in East Baton Rouge and to gain access to the schools that are here. And so just please let that sink in for a minute, that in our region, folks are relocating back into the heart of our community for public education. We see this trend, and it's happening every day and increasing. We also saw last year in education the opening of a decade-long sought program, the Career and Technical Education Center, or CTEC, which is a beautiful new high school campus at Ardendale, devoted to 5 career tracks, which were selected in partnership with BRAC by virtue of the high demand for those fields and needed areas in our economy. Again, new education choices being introduced as public schools. But besides education and workforce, the talent pipeline question is also about diversity. Last year, we hosted our 3rd annual Diversity in Business event Last year, we also introduced our first ever Diversity Star Awards to recognize businesses who excel at diversity practices within their companies. And we think that this beating of this drum is going to be something that continues to build a recognition across companies to focus on diversity as part of their talent strategy. And speaking of talent, another data point we released last year, the Census Bureau data shows that Baton Rouge area continues to see a net positive in-migration of folks into the Baton Rouge area, moving here from places like Lafayette, like from Houston, from New Orleans, and at rates, mind you, exceeding those of places like Birmingham or Mobile or Louisville, Kentucky, as I've talked about. We still have a way to go, and there is a national war for talent, but we're on the right track and we're seeing it improve. We know that more and more our site consultants that we work with, they put talent as their number one concern when talking about what drives economic development decisions. And so it's a high priority for BRAC and our work. And our talent team has actually assisted the likes of folks like Oxnard, Community Coffee, even LSU with customized or group talent tours where we help folks make the decision to relocate to the Baton Rouge area who have never lived here. In fact, just last Friday, we conducted a bus tour for 30 young professionals from Exxon, most of them under 30 years old, actually, who have moved here from all over the world. And the same day that we were hosting that bus tour, we also hosted an individual customized tour for a newcomer considering a position as a vice president at a company in Baton Rouge who wanted to learn more about living in Ascension Parish. And we were excited to help that family try to make that decision for themselves and learn more about the Baton Rouge area. And we think of recruiting people in the same way that we think of recruiting companies. We know that these things drive economic development. And since 2016, we've actually hosted 438 people, either for group or individualized tours. And it's kind of like the beauty, I think, of compound interest, where attracting talented people can attract more people, and that talent dividends can pay in compound ways over many decades. And that's what this program is all about. We also are excited to announce the results of BRAC's Micro Enterprise Credential. Last year, it had its first full year in effect as a statewide jumpstart credential for workforce needs, providing high school students across Louisiana with practical knowledge about working at small businesses. Over 4,000 students earned that credential across the state of Louisiana. It's a Department of Education approved credential, and that was all throughout its first full year, and over 700 students just here in the Baton Rouge area, which is a great program, and encourage all of you to spread the word about what it can do for students to know more about what it means to work in business, and especially in small business. We are also making good on a pledge that we made back in 2016 to elevate the Baton Rouge area's external image. Our marketing team, in partnership with a contract firm that we use for public relations, just last year they secured 53 national media mentions about Baton Rouge, about assets like the water campus. And since the start of that contract in mid-2017, has been over 70 stories about the Baton Rouge area, either about quality of life or our assets. And it's starting to create a trend and a narrative that's getting reinforced. In fact, we got a text this weekend that in Garden and Gun, one of the bars in Baton Rouge got written about to show that this is a really exciting new bar in our community. And that was something that we expect to see happen more as our positive stories get out there, that more and more writers in national media look to our quality of life, look to our community for stories. And finally, more than a decade in the making, last year we completed the $3 million transformation of our shoddy old Chamber of Commerce building into the David E. Roberts Center for Economic Development. And since moving back into the building last September, and it's been awesome to watch, I think we've hosted at least one economic development prospect in our building a week since moving back into that building. Mind you, I think since I started working at BRAC in 2008, maybe we hosted 5 or maybe 10 prospects in the entire time I worked there up until the renovation occurred, because primarily we didn't want them to judge Baton Rouge by how crummy that building was and have that be the definition of who we are as a community. And so you can imagine the excitement that we feel to see that it's working. But it's not just for economic development and new companies considering a decision. We also expanded and added a 100-person conference room, and we've already started hosting business education seminars in our building. We could never do that. We never had the opportunity to have them coming into our building to learning about business practices. We've also extended the offering that nonprofits like prison reentry programs have been hosting gatherings in our building on an almost weekly basis. And it's so exciting to see folks using the building, the Wampole boardroom as we call it, for community purposes, not just for economic development purposes. And I invite any of you who hear this or learn about this, call us and think about ways to use our space for the greater good of the community. So seeing the forest really clearly now, I think it's important to see that the community is truly on an upswing and we have some great momentum still. And we shouldn't imagine that 2019 is going to be defined by our beginning of the year. In fact, I would say that the year is really going to be defined by leadership still on a few other critical priorities. And so let me highlight just a few of those that are critical for this year. We're going to release our strategic plan a little later this week, but I want to just touch on two things specifically. First, it's years past time, possibly decades past time, for constructing a new Mississippi River Bridge. So now that Move BR is done, I-12 has been widened. I-10 widening has its funding, or at least most of the funding necessary for its work. Washington Street is being addressed, the exit issue. And I-10 at Ascension is almost finished. So now it's 1,000% clear to everyone in the region that building a new South Bridge is the top transportation priority, possibly the top economic development priority for our 9-parish area going forward. And I love what was announced here a few weeks ago to call it the Capital Expressway and the Capital Bridge. You know, giving a name to a thing helps it make it real. And so let's call it that. Let's call it the Capital Expressway and the Capital Bridge, but let's get it done. We worked last year, as I mentioned, with Senator Rick Ward to help pass the legislation for the Bridge District, and this is the year really to get that work kick-started. Lots of studies have occurred since 2008 to advance the South Bridge project, but for all their work to try to understand the possibilities, they have not necessarily gotten it done yet, right? So what needs to be happening to move it forward? A few things. First, political alignment and unity of purpose. It's something that this new South Bridge District is really created to help do, to pull us together as a 5-parish area and focus on the project. You know, the South Bridge doesn't have an elected constituency because we are a region and we have many parishes and many parish presidents and many councils. But we all have to pull together on a single strategy for the good of all our citizens across the region. The Bridge District has to finish its environmental assessment for the Capital Expressway and receive its final determination of its feasibility, its design, its cost, and a bridge location. If it can be financed 100% by tolls, which of course is ideal, it also needs a request for information, a request for qualifications, and a request for proposals to get a developer partner selected who could finance and construct the project. Moreover, if it cannot be solely funded by tolls, which may be likely, we need to know how much it's going to cost after tolls are maxed out and make sure that we move forward to find a way to determine how to pay for it. Now, I actually think that in the optimism of what we've seen in the last 12 months for solutions for transportation, we can overcome these questions. Given the political will, the unity of this project, we see a lot of excitement for this project to be real. We know that there is a lot of interest in the region. There's a lot of unity. I would stand here today and say it's real and it's coming. It's just a matter of leadership, and we've got a lot moving in the right direction. We're excited to see that everybody is pulling in the right direction and pulling together to try to figure it out. The second priority I want to talk about has to do with race, with quality of place, and community redevelopment. In our board's strategic planning this last year, we actually had a great deal of emotion and a great deal of spirit about the need to work as a unified community, about reinvesting in our inner core and our underinvested communities. Our business leaders spoke passionately about the concern they felt for all of the areas of our community, as well as what the economic potential it represents to see all of our communities lifted up. Since championing, with many others, the passage of its legislation, we've been very optimistic supporters of the Redevelopment Authority. In fact, last year, we took a canvas trip to Cincinnati in May, significantly because we wanted to see their programs for community redevelopment in an area called Over the Rhine. We also wanted to see their diversity in business initiatives. What we saw was eye-opening. It was exciting for a number of reasons, but we also saw that it took a lot of time and it had slow progress until it finally worked. And while it may be slow, we have to plug away at it and make progress. And we think that we can too if we keep pressing forward. So this year, our board, our staff, we want to push forward for greater progress on these goals. Our board, our Diversity and Inclusion Committee, our Small Business and Entrepreneurship Committee, and our Business Development Advisory Committee are all working on different efforts that have a part of this. I want to talk about a few of those. We see initiatives coming together already at the beginning of this year to focus on creating and launching a minority business accelerator or multiple accelerators that can focus on unleashing the power of free enterprise to help with community wealth creation. We also see larger companies saying they want to be involved in procurement initiatives and see that they partner with these accelerator programs to identify ways that they can do business with these small businesses to help to lift them up, to focus on minority and disadvantaged businesses with new procurement opportunities from the private sector. And we also see that this has a component of this that's related to quality of place, which I've talked about before. There are over 5,000 blighted properties in Baton Rouge. If you go today to Open Data BR, it lists 25,000 adjudicated property records for our community. So our Quality of Place Committee has been laser focused now on the challenges and issues of blight. And there are a lot of policy issues that need to be addressed if we want to try to unleash the free market to try to address these issues. We also have things that need to be happening that happened in New Orleans after Katrina and other communities around the country to make sure that we simplify and accelerate the path for blighted properties to re-enter commerce, including issues of title insurance, which have largely been challenges for a lot of our properties in our community. For our business development team, they want to focus more aggressively on site certification, especially focusing on new opportunities for manufacturing and a lot of industrial sites that are available in North Baton Rouge. Sites that can create opportunities for new jobs and new investment. And we've seen our site certification program identified by LED as the best in the state. So we want to bring those resources to bear even more in North Baton Rouge. We also want to see the success of the Redevelopment Authority and their initiative on Plank Road. And a strong and successful initiative from the Redevelopment Authority holds great potential, especially in light of the passage of the Opportunity Zone legislation that was created a year ago in the President and Congress's tax reform bill. We also hope they will succeed, and others will succeed, in creating the new bus rapid transit line that's been proposed that would connect Plank Road all the way to LSU and unite our community with a very significant and meaningful and symbolic, in many ways, transit initiative that can also create economic opportunity that links our communities. We also will have our 4th annual Diversity in Business event where we'll award our 2nd year in a row the Diversity Star Awards that I mentioned. We also plan to roll out a new initiative that's going to recognize and call out ways that leadership and corporate community can also focus at an even greater level on diversity initiatives within their businesses. We know that this progress is significantly about race and race relations in our community. It's also about important promises that many made, including us, back in 2016, to focus on these issues as a whole community and to work aggressively year in and year out to bring things to fruition. So those are 2 big priorities for this year, priorities for BRAC, for our team, and for our board, and 2 big important ones that I think mean a lot for the future of our community. And so seeing the forest canopy of Baton Rouge, rather than the trees that are in front of us, I think we'll have a lot of progress this year. I truly think that we're headed in the right direction. And I think we have a lot of what we need to make significant progress as we move forward toward that significant hallmark year of 2020. So thank you again for inviting me to speak. Be happy to take any questions that you have at this time. Thank you. Yes?
The workers that lost their jobs over at Georgia Pacific and BASF and the pipe plant, how easy is it for them to convert them to go work in other petrochemical jobs? Is it kind of an easy switch over? Is it a little bit of a difficulty? What exactly?
So if this is stable to hold my glass of water, I will set it on it. The question is, how easy is it for the employees, to find new opportunities? It depends on the skill type. So if you look across just for example, with what's happening at Georgia Pacific, the skill types of what's there. Some of the workers work in the lumber yard. They're more likely going to be seeking work within their industry, whereas some of those that work specifically in the manufacturing processes have a fairly straightforward, perhaps with a little retraining, but straightforward crosswalk over into a lot of the other manufacturing opportunities that are available in the community. Many of those are also involved in the maintenance and upkeep of those facilities, and those same skills are necessary across the community. Many of them are trained in the same process engineering and process technology skills that come out of Baton Rouge Community College, for example. And so those same skills are going to be necessary and a lot of the area employers that are interested in those folks. But even if they don't have a direct correlation, what we have heard most from those that have signed up is a well-trained, skilled employee base can find a home in a lot of different types of employers. What we saw from the state, they said through the Louisiana Workforce Commission, is they're going to be setting up training programs to be able to work with the employees for whatever possible skills they might want to gain to be able to enter into new opportunities. But we hope to see at the job fair that's going to be held on February 9th on Saturday, all day on that day, is that many of the folks that are out there find opportunities available to them right away and that don't have to necessarily go through too much retraining, but if they have to, they're going to be there and offered from the state. For Thompson Pipe, similarly, I think that's it's kind of the manufacturing process is a different kind of thing, but you actually have other pipe manufacturers in the community who are going to look for those skill types, whether that's the pipe manufacturing facilities in Livingston Parish, or for example in West Baton Rouge with Turner, a lot of other pipe fabrication facilities that'll be looking for those same types of employees. Companies like Stupp, it's also in the northern part of East Baton Rouge Parish and have been hiring a lot in the last few years, have other opportunities for them. So I think there'll be a lot of folks that are reaching out. And of course, BASF has already said that they're trying to find as many of those folks that can find positions within BASF elsewhere in the region. So hopefully a lot of those things are going to help to capture and pick up the employees that are out there so that we don't see too much of a negative effect. And hopefully, if anything, we can work through this blip and see growth and our forecasts continue to hit where our targets have been expecting. I think I was here in the back there.
Would REC support putting ITEP back under the state as Franklin Foyle and Bodie White appear to be lobbying for? Or is there a way for local tax collecting agencies to run a system that you all would consider predictable and easy to work within?
So our focus right now is making the system as it exists work. And I think that we have had enough confusion to try to anticipate any other changes that may be made at the state level. And so what right now is important for us as a community, and this really is, again, the intention of the letter that occurred this weekend by our board, is to say we have the ability to get to a place of predictability and stability as a community, and we don't need to wait to see any other changes to make sure that the community here has a predictable environment to move forward. We've seen projects approved in Ascension Parish, and Iberville Parish, and Livingston Parish, and so we want to see that we can get to that place in our community as well. In fact, just a few weeks before Exxon was rejected, we saw their Baton Rouge polyolefins project approved unanimously by the East Baton Rouge School Board, by the Metropolitan Council, and by the Sheriff. And so we think there are ways that our community is embracing and can embrace it. What's unfortunate is we want to make sure that when you set a policy in place, that those criteria are used to evaluate projects. And so our focus is going to be on making sure that the rules as they are in place today are effective, predictable, and can be followed by our community.
If I can ask a follow-up.
Sure.
What's the first thing we should look at to make them more predictable and stable?
So a few things. I think that the guidelines that have been laid out, most everybody thinks those are good guidelines. What everybody has said all along is, tell us what the policy is so that we can follow it. BRAC's team has been working with leadership from both Metro Council and School Board and to try to advocate for the need for a fixed policy. And so seeing those guidelines established was something that we were deeply hopeful for. And in fact, for those who have been closely watching this from back when there was a coordinating committee, we were calling for a matrix from the beginning, set forward a set of policies and stick to it. So our thinking is mainly set those rules in place. We'd like to see the state be involved into helping to make sure that everybody understands the state guidelines, the state rules, and how those interplay with the local guidelines, and that if questions are asked, that governmental bodies are the ones that are saying, hey, how do the rules work and how should we interpret the rules, and to make sure that the state or local governmental bodies are the ones interpreting the rules that they have set in place and making judgments of whether a project fits or doesn't fit the guidelines that have been adopted. What we don't necessarily want to see is that those guidelines can be subject necessarily to perhaps whim or the vagaries of the mood of a moment, rather than following what the guidelines have outlined. And that's what I think we want to see, is just set the guidelines and follow them once they're in place. And I think there was a question in the back.
I think you answered my question.
Okay. I think there was a question up front.
He actually had my question.
All right, we're going to get a lot of repeats. John.
One of the things that I found most interesting in your talk today was and I hadn't heard this before, the fact that more people are coming back into the school system, into East Baton Rouge Parish school system. Do you have any numbers?
No, thank you, John. Yeah, the question, I'm sorry, I realized I didn't do that last time. I'm surprised nobody threw bread at me. The question is it was surprising to John that that I highlighted that a lot of folks are re-entering the public education system. What I'm highlighting is an anecdotal evidence that as new school choices are being introduced, it really, we see, is beginning to change what folks their behavior patterns are. And I highlighted examples of that we saw where families were calling and saying, hey, we're moving back into East Baton Rouge Parish because of some of the options that are being created, not just like BASF, where it's a charter school, but even at some of the traditional schools of East Baton Rouge that folks are really excited for. I can remember a time, and I'm sure many of you can, when people said, only if there were more Baton Rouge highs, my gosh, what would that be like for our community? Well, you could, I named many of them, but you could say that about so many schools today. What if there were more Mayfair Labs or Flames? That's the narrative we're seeing, is there are so many new choices that families in neighborhoods are finding those choices and telling their friends and family members and cousins and colleagues at work and folks at church. That narrative is spreading, and that's what I'm highlighting here, is that trend is changing. And that's one that I think we're going to begin to see that the data backs that up, is that early trend line is one that we're going to see play out in the coming months and maybe years, is that folks are actually re-entering public education at more significant rates.
You spoke of the 650 jobs for Georgia Pacific that are going to be lost. What does that mean for the support workers and everybody else, the contractors and so forth that contributes to that as well? Because that's going to be exponentially larger than that 650.
So the question is, what about all the different support contractors and service workers that are a part of supporting a company like Georgia Pacific? They are likely already making plans that as they kind of transition their work at one company, that their teams are going to be picked up and restaffed to other companies. We actually had conversations with a number of the service firms to gauge what they think about it, and their comments were to us that, you know, we see this more often than perhaps the rest of you do. That transitions in client services needs change fairly often, and while one may go down, they see increases at others. So they were not necessarily concerned that there isn't going to be plenty of other opportunities for increases in maintenance and service contracts. Now, you know, you hate to see any manufacturing lines taken away or shut down. So it definitely is something we, as I highlighted, has a ripple effect across the economy that we have to make sure we continue to work on. But from our kind of reach out to the companies, they still see a lot of expansion happening in manufacturing, not only here but across Louisiana, across especially kind of coastal Louisiana, across the manufacturing sector. So they're already seeing other opportunities and growth for their companies. So they think they're going to have opportunities to take those folks that are affected by, say, Georgia Pacific and find new places for them at new firms in elsewhere in Baton Rouge or elsewhere in the state.
Can I ask one follow-up to that?
Yeah, go ahead.
What about like the local businesses that are going to be affected? Usually, let's say doing lunches for these people.
Yeah.
How's it going to affect the community around there?
Well, I think you highlight, the question is, what about the local businesses and small businesses and the community, if I can add to that, that surrounds, say, Georgia Pacific or BASF site or Thompson Pipe. I think it's right to still have concern about the effect that this can have, especially in Zachary or kind of the area surrounding Zachary. Part of the reason to make sure that we're having the job fair in Zachary is to make sure that small businesses are able to understand how this is going to affect them too, that they have access to it. Look, there's going to be an effect from these, and you don't see 800 jobs taken away and not feel it. What is not clear yet is how this is going to affect necessarily, the tax rolls of the community or the school systems, and so those are things that we worry about. We have awareness, of course, that the mayor has expressed an interest, and we've expressed an interest in making sure that we're reaching out not only to Georgia Pacific to find other opportunities for expansion. They have a lot of land that remains there at that facility, and of course the line that remains, they're not shutting down. They have 300 jobs at Georgia Pacific that will continue, and so they have said there may be opportunities in the future as our tissue paper line and paper towel lines continue to grow that side of our business, and so we're hopeful that there are other ways to see potential reinvestment. At Thompson Pipe, once they kind of move off of that site becomes available for other small light manufacturers to consider reinvestment. And so, one moves out, we have a new site open up on Highway 61 that we can go and market to try to find new manufacturers. We have been site constrained as a community for a number of years, and so while that's a negative thing to have a facility like that closed, we want to make sure that we aggressively go in and find other ways to find new manufacturers that might locate on that site.
I was interested in your statement that incentives are last in making decisions about economic investment. And your open letter says that such incentive programs are offered by most states. Do you know if Texas has a similar program to ITEP?
They do. In fact, I don't know the exact number, but it's somewhere around 30 to 35 states have a program like ITEP, where there is a property abatement provided for manufacturers. In fact, other states more commonly use a program called a payment in lieu of taxes, or PILOT is the acronym, and you'll hear other states, when they're not using their kind of traditional off-the-shelf statutory incentive, their property tax abatement, that they also have the opportunity to negotiate as communities with manufacturers and offer something like a pilot for those. So it's very common across states that they use that. Texas offers a program very similar to ITEP. It is driven by local decision making across Texas. The biggest difference is there is no Louisiana Board of Commerce and Industry equivalent in Texas. It is upon their local communities to make that decision. In Texas, they come together as many taxing entities, so schools or police or fire or sheriffs, the local city councils, and they try to make those decisions in a unified way about what exemptions get provided. They also have the ability above a kind of a baseline that they publish as their base incentive, that they can negotiate above that rate. And so the example in Corpus Christi, when there was the $10 billion ExxonMobil project that went to Corpus Christi, they provided 100% abatement for 10 years across all exemptions to try to land that massive facility in Corpus Christi. So they're absolutely using property tax abatements to try to win incentives in their community. So yes, it's a common tool. What is different, is changing here, and I think an important part of this conversation is the local involvement in that decision making, and that the threshold is not always 100%, but now in Louisiana 80% is the maximum amount of abatement, so that 20% is available to local communities day one when a manufacturing facility is placed on the tax rolls to start contributing in the community.
All right, everyone, that's all we have.
Thank you for having me today. I appreciate you hosting us.